Judge Xinis, in her own words, doesn't want to be a cat, having Donald Trump try to take the ball of yarn away from her. She's got better things to do, like finding the Trump administration in contempt of court. She certainly invited it. And then we have the return of Armando Abrego Garcia. Lo and behold, he just wandered back in from El Salvador, probably just, they let him out. They looked the other way and he hitchhiked. No. The Trump administration used a phony extradition method to bring him back from El Salvador to try to get away from contempt proceedings for Judge Xinis and for the United States Supreme Court. Is that going to work? Can't we all see through the phony indictment, the phony extradition relationship with El Salvador? I know where we do see through it. On Legal AF, the podcast, and here's a clip.
But Popok, talk about Judge Zinnus for a second, because that leads us into the Abrego Garcia conversation. And we don't necessarily have to get to yet on this portion of the show, Abrego being returned, although we'll get there. But there was a lot of pressure being applied on the Trump regime. In all of these cases, we had, they're all were being teed up for sanctions and then really kind of heading towards criminal contempt. And what I think was happening here was that the DOJ lawyers who are on the front lines, they're worried that they're going to lose their bar license, and they're worried that they're going to be held in criminal contempt because they keep being told different things, false things by the Trump regime. And they have an obligation as the lawyers to find out if it's true before going to the judge and saying and making false representations. So I think that what's really been going on behind the scenes is the DOJ basically saying, look, we're going to lose all of our lawyers because no one's going to work for us if one of our lawyers starts to be held in criminal contempt because they keep peddling these ridiculous lies. So just bring the guy back, indict him. But these things are all teed up for sanctions against our lawyers, and our lawyers are going to get in trouble. I think that's what was happening. What do you think?
I would have agreed with you, but people like when sometimes you and I respectfully disagree. I may have agreed with you before I read Drew Enson's filing right after the return of Abrego Garcia, and not to tease out the the cliffhanger. Abrego Garcia got brought back yesterday, and it has a domino cascading impact on both the cases that we're now talking about. But the pressure to bear came from Judge Xinis, who has remarkably kept her foot on the gas and her foot on the neck of the Trump administration, empowered by a 9-0 ruling by the United States Supreme Court. Not just 9-0 ruling. There's also been a 7-2 and a 6-3 all around the same thing. And when you synthesize the United States Supreme Court's ruling, even though we're going to talk about them siding with Trump about Doge later, when it comes to due process, habeas corpus, notice, and Fifth Amendment rights, they seem to be relatively unified, that Donald Trump has to, he can try the Alien Enemies Act, he can try these deportations, but they are entitled to habeas corpus, due process rights in the United States before a federal judge in our adversarial process. And that's just the way it is. So, and not to keep people on the edge of their seat, I'll read from the Drew Ensign filing, one of the guys you're talking about, who may or may not be worried about his law license. Although there was just a filing with the Florida bar against Pam Bondi, and they rejected the grievance complaint against her and her bar license for all the crazy things that she's doing to violate the Department of Justice manual. So I'm not so sure the remaining group that's left here, they are the Kool-Aid drinkers. They are the true believers. And I think Drew Ensign, who fired the guy who was a friend of his, who made the mortal error of telling the truth to Judge Xinis originally, when he said, yeah, Judge, Abrego Garcia had an order of non-removal to El Salvador. ICE knew about it and put him on the plane anyway. Once he admitted that guy's no longer with us. I mean, I think he's with us, but he's no longer with the Department of Justice, and Drew Ensign fired him. Wait till we get to that. But how do we get to the pressure campaign? Since April the 10th, at least, when the Supreme Court ruled for Abrego Garcia and supported Judge Xinis in Maryland, in which they said, I'm paraphrasing, you do you. You made the right decision. You're administrating justice properly in this case. Due process is important. You need to protect it. Notice is important. You need to protect it. And we're okay with you demanding, back to our watchword, the that the Trump administration facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia from the jails of El Salvador. Yeah, he said something about effectuate that we didn't like. We don't know what effectuate means, but facilitate we're fine with. And make sure you stay on top of the Trump administration and get reports about what they're doing to comply with our now affirmed order. That's where we start on the 10th of April. We are now almost the 10th of June. It is 2 months of cat and mouse, or as I like to say, a pissed off cat in the form of Judge Xinis and a mouse in the form of the Trump administration. She at one time used that analogy. She said, I feel like I'm a cat in this hearing and you're just yanking the ball of yarn away from me every time I ask a question. So we knew she was on the precipice of finding them in contempt. She's letting the Abrego Garcia side, represented by the ACLU and by Quinn Emanuel law firm, bring the motion. Although she has inherent authority, I've talked about this on Hot Takes. Judges have inherent authority to find contempt when orders have been violated. They don't need somebody to file a motion, but she wants to make a record. So she's letting the motion be filed. I thought the story coming on to Saturday today was going to be that she just got totally fed up with the Trump administration and said, file your motion for contempt. In other words, inviting a motion she's surely to sign. That happens on Thursday. She also strips away some protection about some sealed public filings because the Trump administration, to continue with our vocabulary today, in an Orwellian moment, every time they say we're transparent, you know they're opaque. They don't let you know anything. So they've been filing all these things on the docket. 14 media organizations intervene in the case and said, we can't do reporting if you keep letting sealed things end up on the docket. And she also stripped that in a number of documents away. So that was the 1-2 punch. Then Boasberg certifying the class on the other people, the other Abrego Garcias, as we lead into Friday. So I do agree with you that there was tremendous pressure, that they had gone as far as they felt they could go in disobeying ultimately the United States Supreme Court, that this was a losing hand, but they were only going to do it under the ruse of having filed in May you and I caught it, but it was so ridiculous that we didn't really spend much time with it. But now we know that what the gambit was. File an indictment in the Middle District of Tennessee in Nashville against Abrego Garcia, claiming that he's a human smuggler of undocumented people since Trump's first administration, according to the indictment. Of course, nowhere mentioning that he's a murderer or a gangbanger, whatever that is, or anything else. Just that he had 8 guys in a car, got picked up at a traffic stop, between a Home Depot and a construction site. Okay. He was, again, never gave it a ticket. Never indicted for anything prior to this one in May. And now you've got the return. So I'll turn it over to you now.
Well, that's going to be an interesting case because Abrego Garcia is going to have the best lawyers, and you're going to bring up that police officer who pulled over Abrego Garcia back in 2022 when he had 8 other guys in the car. And I could just imagine that cross-exam. You've studied all the signs of trafficking and you've done all of this, and you let him go with the warning. You let him go with the warning. You would have, obviously, if you thought there was something serious going on, you would not have let him, right? I mean, I could just imagine how the Trump regime's about to put even the local Tennessee Highway Patrol and everybody in a really difficult situation. So
wait. Before you go on, we always like to put ourselves into a courtroom. Think about the cross-examination of the chief of the criminal division who quit over the indictment. We'll talk about that, and they pulled a really great judge, which I'm sure is driving Trump back to apoplexy.
All right, Popok, what I wanted to share with you and the Legal AFers was that disastrous press conference, and I want to hear your reaction to it, that Pam Bondi held after Abrego Garcia returned to the United States. The corrupt Gestapo Department of Justice under the Trump regime was waiting with a trafficking indictment for him, and Pam Bondi was ready to hold this press conference. And she starts talking about things that aren't in the indictment. The indictment alleges trafficking and conspiracy to commit trafficking. And to be clear, what the trafficking allegation is, the only specific allegation was that sometime in 2022, Abrego Garcia was in a vehicle with 8 other Hispanic males who were going somewhere, and they were pulled over, and Abrego Garcia was driving the Suburban And the Suburban looked like it was slightly modified to remove any space for the trunk so it could hold more individuals. A trooper pulled them over and said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're going to work." And the trooper said, "All right, I'm going to leave you with a warning. You can go on your way." So that's the only like specific allegation that's there. I think the Department of Justice claims they have some informant who used Abrego as a mule, as a driver, not for drugs or anything. I mean, literally just to help to be the Uber for migrants to go from a location to location. That's what they mean. That's the only allegation. There's nothing about drugs, smuggling. There's nothing about child sex trafficking or sex trafficking. There's nothing about murdering or being a gangbanger. None of that is in there. But Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, mentioned all of those things in her press conference and accused Abrego of that. And it's not in the indictment. Here's what she said during the press conference. Let's play it.
I have two. One's on topic, one's off topic. Maybe I misunderstood you, but you were mentioning, that he had some involvement in a murder, or was connected to groups that had, involved with this other smuggling ring. But to be clear, the only charges he's facing right now are the human smuggling charges. Just that's the one offense. But the other things that you have talked about are not actually in the indictment.
No, co-conspirators allege that, and we were clear to say that he is charged with. It's not only very serious charges of alien smuggling,
and then she goes on in the press conference to talk about MS-13 gang member that was unrelated to Abrego. And then she's like, then there's this MS-13 gang member in Virginia who's the leader and they're not related, but they're MS, so they must be involved. Popok, as soon as she did that press conference, you had that guy, I think is Ben Schrader, on LinkedIn. He did a LinkedIn resignation, the head of the criminal division for the Tennessee district for the Department of Justice. Because he said, just my time. This is not why I joined the Department of Justice. I worked for Trump's first administration, Obama. I worked for Biden, and he was still working for Trump. And he's just like, you're not going to force me to do stupid cases like this that aren't real cases so that you could go around and disgrace our justice system. So I give Ben Schrader a lot of credit for doing that very public resignation. Popok, talk to us about Abrego coming in. What's the fall? How does that relate to the case that's going on before Judge Xinis? What do you make of all this?
Well, first of all, her press conference, I said it on a hot take I did recently. I haven't seen a human being blink that much outside of a hostage video. When she's uncomfortable and she's not telling the truth. Her tell is she just has this weird affect where she blinks incessantly for questions that she knew had to be coming. I mean, you would have thought that she didn't, that she caught that question caught her flat-footed about where is it in your indictment. Now, to be not fair, to be complete, I have the indictment. There is mention of narcotics in the indictment, and it is referenced and reincorporated when they get to human smuggling. But that's just the way, like in paragraph 20, in paragraph 20 something or other, I'll find it while we're still doing this together. They talk about firearms being distributed and drugs and narcotics being distributed by Armando Garcia. But then when it gets to the counts, even though they reincorporate those provisions, it is for unlawful transportation of undocumented aliens. It has the one paragraph of the only thing that we know from reporting is that when he got picked up 3 years ago in Tennessee carrying 8 other men without luggage, the state trooper looked into it, talked to the FBI, and they let him go. Because they said, yeah, he's going to a construction site with these guys. And the fact that they've now alleged through this confidential informant, this elaborate scheme since 2016 in Trump's first administration, because wasn't he president then? Yes, he was, of MS-13, which also, by the way, undermines the whole argument of the use of the Alien Enemies Act. Because in order to use the Alien Enemies Act to have sent him away in the first place, you have to show that it's like an imminent incursion akin to war footing. Well, how is something going on in 2016 an imminent incursion that allows a president in 2025 to issue his proclamation? That's one inconsistency that will help trip up the Trump administration. So you have the press conference, and she mentions Virginia, which is where within 4 days of that press conference, she dismissed the charges against that particular guy and that indictment. So I don't know why she's continuing to use that as a justification. But again, they want to, it's a shell game. They don't have enough evidence against Abrego Garcia. They violate their Department of Justice manual and their prosecutorial ethics, which is why this guy, the head of the criminal division, resigns upon the indictment, because he also knew, it's obvious, he also knew what the two-step trick was going to be. Right? And that the trick was going to be not just to indict. I'm sure he was in on conversations about what they were going to do next. Well, he's in El Salvador. Well, no, we're going to use this indictment to bring him back eventually. I mean, that was obviously discussed and left him disgusted. So now you've got Abrego Garcia back. So what happens next? Well, I said on a hot take that something is going to happen immediately in Judge Xinis' courtroom, who presides over all things Abrego Garcia. And right on cue, they filed late last night, signed by Drew Ensign, the piñata of the week for the Trump administration. They filed two things: a letter, and they filed a notice informing the judge that hey, we've complied with your preliminary injunction. It's all better now, right, Judge? No more contempt. We brought him back. Here's what they say, and then I'll tell them why this doesn't solve the contempt problem. This proves the contempt. They say on April 4th, 2025, this court, Judge Xinis' court, ordered defendants to facilitate the return of plaintiff Armando Abrego Garcia to the United States. Side note, they then went off to 2 levels of court, lost at the Fourth Circuit twice, lost at the United States Supreme Court, all within 6 or 7 days, got a 9-0 decision against them that they were wrong and Zinnus was right. So that's what happened there. Defendants hereby provide notice that they've complied with the court's order and indeed have successfully facilitated Abrego Garcia's return. As the Attorney General recently announced, as we just showed the press conference, the return to the United States today to stand trial on criminal charges in the Middle District of Tennessee. Considering this development, the court's preliminary injunction should be dissolved and the underlying case is moot, and we should have a stay of all deadlines. Love and kisses, Drew Ensign. All right, there's a problem with that. And then he writes a letter to the judge about, we're never going to tell you what we did. We're never going to tell you why we did it. We're never going to tell you why we waited 2 months or any of it, because we're going to claim state secret privilege, attorney-client privilege, and executive privilege. And here's our letter brief that says exactly that. We brought him back. That doesn't work. For the same reason that Judge Boasberg continued to find the Trump administration in probable cause for criminal contempt, even after his underlying order was modified by the Supreme Court. The judge reminded them at the time, so they know in real time that this doesn't work, what they're trying to do. He said to them in the Boasberg case, no, the case law says you are not allowed to operate with impunity, as if you know I'm going to be reversed one day, and that gives you the right not to follow my orders. We have a word for that. It's called contempt of court. You're in contempt of court, and the fact that you later got a change in some of my analysis, that does not help you and get you out from under contempt. Same thing here. They have been in contempt of court, as far as I'm concerned, and anybody's fair-minded, since April the 10th, when the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 to facilitate and to provide Judge Zinnus with all the information she needed to administer that case. And they told her to go pound sand. They told her to go F herself. You know what I mean? They told her, they taunted her in the Supreme Court. Pam Bondi actually had a press conference where she said, he's never coming back. Full stop. That was a month ago. They took the New York Times headline, posted it. I'm sure it's a Stephen Miller special, posted it on the White House social media page, editing with a red pen, the New York Times headline, we're never going to bring him back. Ha, ha, ha. And then they purposely brought Bukele from El Salvador in this taunting kabuki theater pitch and catch thing in the White House, where Bukele says, I'll never bring him back. I would never smuggle in a killer or whatever he said he was. And Trump said, I never would ask you to do that. Just taunting. In the meantime, telling the judge, Marco Rubio, I'll never tell the judge what I know. All right. Well, now this does not help them. This shows for me, Ben, and I'm sure you too, that they've had the ability, as Judge Boasberg pointed out in his case, to control what happens in El Salvador since the very beginning. And the fact that they did it on their own timetable, waiting for all the ducks to get in a row in Tennessee before they brought him back, does not stop them from being found in contempt of court. We are going to have, either through her inherent authority. If I were her, I'd be like, screw the motion. I got enough now. If I were the judge, I would already, like Monday after a hearing, find them in contempt of court and get the process started up to the appellate court and to the Supreme Court. I know she's very judicious. She'll probably continue with the motion practice, which will play out over the month of June, and then it'll end up in DC and back at the Supreme Court. But this did not help them solve the problem of getting out from under the contempt of Judge Xinis.
And it didn't solve the problem, although the Trump regime probably thinks it does, of what's happening in Judge Boasberg's court, facilitate the due process rights of everybody in SECAT that you sent there unlawfully at this point. Now, what the Trump regime is trying to do here is they're saying, well, the only reason we've been able to facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia is because of this indictment and under our extradition powers, that once he was indicted, we then formally petitioned under international extradition law to be able to get Abrego Garcia back. And that's why we can only give Abrego back. But what the Trump regime is going to say, so for all of the other people who are there, we can't facilitate it because we don't have any indictments of them, which backfires in their face. And this is why they don't think two steps ahead, because then they're basically admitting that everybody else who's in SECAT is innocent and hasn't committed any crimes at all. And thus there's nothing to even charge them with in the United States. You know, the thing is, whether it's been El Chapo, drug lords, some of the most violent international criminals, America never wanted those individuals to go to other courts. If America could extradite and try and charge these people in the United States, we have supermax prisons here in the United States that are far more secure than other prisons throughout the world. And so we would want the worst of the worst prosecuted in the US. We would have no fear that in the past ever, Democrat or Republican administration, that our administrations, that the justice would be dispensed in a way that would not lead to the right outcome, such that we need to send people to concentration camps in foreign countries, whether it's El Salvador or Libya or all of these places, and then justice would be dispensed. So the interesting thing is, now that we see Abrego being returned, I think it's a stronger argument in Boasberg's case for everybody to be returned as well. And clearly it could be facilitated. Clearly Bukele can do it.
Welcome back. We sit at the intersection of law and politics every week, every hour, so you don't have to. On Legal AF, I'm joined by another dozen contributors. I curate the channel for you as a co-founder of Legal AF, the podcast. Twice a week, we do Legal AF, the podcast. On Saturdays, I do it with Ben Meiselas, my beloved co-founder. On Saturdays with Karen Friedman-Kniflo, I've been doing it with her for the last 4.5 years. And then we do hot takes like this about every hour at that same intersection. So you can help us in a number of ways. Take that clip, send it off to people in your life, and ask them to join our journey, our movement. We could use the views. We could use the audio downloads. We are in the top, I would say we're in the top 50 of YouTube, all YouTube podcasts. We're certainly in the top one of one for Law and Politics podcast. But that's all because of you. We appreciate it. We're continuing, it's competition out there. Continue to grow that audience. So until my next report, I'm Michael Popok. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.